This might be the best group of running backs fantasy football has ever seen, and that is not an exaggeration. Welcome to the Fantasy Trading Room YouTube channel. My name is Joe. Today, we're going to be breaking down the top 12 running backs in redraft fantasy football for 2025. As we know, the running back position is one of the most volatile in all of fantasy football. Jobs are won and lost constantly in the NFL, and it's kind of hard to keep up with all the constant changes of the position. However, I believe these top 12 are pretty locked into their starting jobs. Disagree with me if you want, but we're hopping into the rankings right now. First up, we have Saquon Barkley of the Philadelphia Eagles. He was the best running back in the NFL in 2024, and you have to ask yourself, what's really changed about his situation? The answer is not much. The Eagles are returning 4 of their 5 starters in the offensive line. And let me remind you, that unit was among the best in the NFL in 2024. They helped Barkley achieve the most productive year of his career, and in large part made that Super Bowl victory possible. But even with Hurts taking a ton of red zone carries, Saquon Barkley still had 13 rushing touchdowns, so just imagine the ceiling if he's given more carries on the one. Saquon Barkley rushed for over 2,000 yards, and the most shocking part was he did it at 5.8 yards per carry on a huge workload. If you don't think he's the best running back in football, I don't know what to tell you. And I really don't believe he's going to fall off this year, so I'm not putting anyone above him in my fantasy rankings, at least at the running back position. And again, you have to ask yourself, what's really changed? They have a new offensive coordinator, but this was a promotion. It wasn't an outside hire. He's likely not going to bring in a whole new offensive identity, and I still expect the rushing attack to be the focal point of this offense. So sure, maybe Barkley won't hit 2,000 yards again next season, but I think he's going to be well over a mark like 1,600, so his floor is going to be absolutely fantastic, and in PPR leagues, he's my 102 pretty easily. So Saquon Barkley of the Philadelphia Eagles is going to be the best running back in fantasy football yet again. Next up, we have Bjan Robinson of the Atlanta Falcons, heading into his 3rd season in the NFL already. It felt like he was a rookie just yesterday. I think he's well worth a top 3 pick in redraft leagues. In 2024, he finally broke out, getting that huge workload after the departure of Arthur Smith. The team gave him over 300 carries for the first time in his career, and his fantasy value absolutely exploded. The team has a super strong offensive line, and similarly to Philadelphia, they're returning 4 of their 5 starters from 2024 in that area. And the only thing that's changed in his situation is that the team is trotting out a new starting quarterback in week 1 compared to last season. Michael Penix Jr. is entering his sophomore season with high expectations, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Falcons still lean on the running game. Penix is fairly inexperienced at the NFL level, and Bjan Robinson can absolutely carry drives, whether it's on the ground or through the air. Speaking of that, Robinson is a true PPR machine. He's had over 58 receptions and 400 receiving yards in each of his first 2 seasons in the NFL. It's ridiculous to have those marks as consistent numbers. So I really don't understand why people have Jir Gibbs, who is a fantastic NFL player, over Bjan Robinson in fantasy football. Bijan's volume is way better, and he still gets a ton of work in the passing game. For me, he's my easy 2nd-ranked running back in fantasy football, but if you prefer Gibbs, the wait won't be long to see where he's ranked. Jir Gibbs of the Detroit Lions is my RB3 this season, and unlike the first 2 options, there was a bit more shuffling along the offensive line heading into this season. Christian Mahogany is going to be promoted to a starting role after being more of a reserve offensive lineman this past season. And they did bring in Tate Ratledge, guard out of Georgia in the NFL draft, who I'm super high on as a run blocker. I think he's going to fit into the system well, and I wouldn't be shocked if he's a day 1 starter. I really like this pick for Detroit and for Jir Gibbs. We all know how Jir Gibbs absolutely broke out this past season. He had 1,412 rushing yards, 16 rushing touchdowns, and over 500 receiving yards as well. And the craziest part about his stats is that he had 0 fumbles on the ground, but 5.6 yards per carry. That efficiency is just unbelievable. The only real downsides to Gibbs are that he gets a bit less volume than the top couple guys in fantasy football, and that he does still have to compete with Dave Montgomery. The veteran running back is returning from injury this season, but that has never stopped Gibbs from being a fantastic fantasy option before. He's ascended to one of the best running backs in the entire NFL. He's still super young, and I think he has his best years ahead of him. And while the Lions did lose Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator, I feel confident the offense will still put the ball in the hands of pretty much their best playmaker, and that's Jir Gibbs. So I'm super excited to draft him in the first half of the 1st round for fantasy football in 2025. I could say he's a bit more volatile than the first 2 options, but that's basically splitting hairs. They're all elite fantasy options with high floors that I think will be awesome. Next, we're moving on to a player who, yes, is entering his age 31 season, but just helped me bring home a fantasy league championship. That's Derrick Henry of the Baltimore Ravens. I don't understand how people aren't talking about this guy more. Statistically, he was the 2nd best running back in the NFL in 2024. He had almost 2,000 yards, and it's hard to forget that he had 8 rushing touchdowns in the first 6 weeks of the NFL season. It was a good time to be Derrick Henry's fantasy manager, to say the least. Speaking of rushing touchdowns, when you look at the analytics, he has 0 competition on the goal line. He took 94.7 of the team's carries inside the 5 in 2024, which was the league's best mark, and frankly, pretty unbelievable. I mean, it got to the point when you were watching a Ravens game and they got to that part of the field, you could already pencil in a touchdown for Derrick Henry. He was automatic and always got the football. I think Derrick Henry has found his home in Baltimore. Their offensive coordinator, Todd Monken, is a genius, and I love the creative ways to get Henry the ball in space, and this young, strong offensive line is a huge help. They're not afraid to play to his strengths as a power back and just run him up the gut, but they'll take him outside the tackles too. Derrick Henry, even at 31 years old, is a freight train, and yes, the wheels could fall off any given season, but I don't want to bet against him at this point. I think everyone's still scared to draft him because of his age, but frankly, I'm absolutely willing to take the risk. He's passed the eye test, and the analytics say that he's still among the best running backs in the NFL. Derrick Henry is my RB4 for fantasy football in 2025. Moving into fifth year, I took a huge risk, and I'm putting Ashton Genty, rookie running back for the Las Vegas Raiders here. You can sound off in the comments telling me I'm ridiculous for putting him at this spot in my rankings, but look back in the history of fantasy football, rookie running backs always dominate down the stretch of the season. And just hear me out before you roast me in the comments for having Genty this high. Yes, this is a very scary spot to put a rookie running back in fantasy football rankings, but I'm just being realistic. Over the past 5 years especially, rookies have been absolutely insane in fantasy football. Think of guys like Jamar Chase, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Jir Gibbs, Bucky Irving, Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas as well. Is Genty not as good of a prospect as those players? I think he is. For a bit of background, if you don't know, Ashton Genty was a 6th overall pick in the 2025 NFL Draft. He went to the Las Vegas Raiders, and if you've been sleeping under a rock, he's one of the best running backs in college football history, having a ridiculous career at Boise State. In 2024, he rushed for 2,601 rushing yards, I can't even believe it, while averaging 7 yards per carry, another ridiculous statistic. Rookie running backs, when they're given the starting job, are expected to produce right away. I think Genty is a pro-ready prospect. He has it all. He has patience, vision, contact balance, home run speed, power behind his runs. He can be a weapon as a rusher and a receiver. He's just an all-around 3-down running back. And think about the Raiders. Well, they have a good group of pass catchers. They have Brock Bowers at tight end, obviously, and some solid receivers in Jacoby Myers and Jack Besh. This offense just seems like one that's ready to move into a run-heavy phase. I can see Genty stepping in and getting 20 carries a game. I think this is the highest upside pick in fantasy football leagues in 2025. Genty has a ridiculous production history. He's an elite prospect, and I think this landing spot is very solid. Ashton Genty can absolutely be a top 5 running back in 2025. We're going to move on to the RB6, which is Jonathan Taylor of the Indianapolis Colts. He had a fairly slow start to the season, especially in fantasy, but if you remember correctly, he was the best player in the fantasy football playoffs. He had 627 rushing yards in the final 4 weeks of the NFL season. That statistic kind of shows how insane he was in fantasy down the stretch of the year, and he is a true bell cow running back in what can be considered a run-first offense in Indianapolis. While there are a couple cons in his situation, there's been some shuffling along the offensive line. The Colts lost Will Fries and Ryan Kelly on the interior this season, but they have a couple young players they're ready to step up and replace them with. The Colts also did bolster their young group of pass catchers that already includes Michael Pittman Jr., Josh Downs, Alec Pierce, A.D. Mitchell, and now Tyler Warren, an elite tight end prospect from Penn State who I expect to step in and be a really good player. But to me, this doesn't change the fact that this is a run-heavy offense. I think Taylor is going to get around 300 carries yet again this season. I won't have any hesitance in drafting Jonathan Taylor in the end of the first round or the beginning of the second round in my fantasy drafts. I don't think you should either. He's going to be fantastic, an elite option yet again, and he's going to be a workhorse running back for the Colts. If you've made it this far in the video, go ahead and subscribe to the Fantasy Trading Room YouTube channel. We're going to be putting out helpful fantasy football videos every single week, and while you have the chance, we have a channel for Dynasty Fantasy as well as the NFL Draft. Those channels are the Dynasty Trading Room and the NFL Trading Room. Feel free to look them up and check out our content. We are super active on all 3 channels. And if you're looking for a one-stop shop for all of your fantasy needs, FTR has you covered. Moving into the second half of our rankings, we have Devon Achane at the RB7. It's hard to forget how much of a PPR machine this dude was. He led all NFL running backs in receptions, receiving yards, and tied the league high for receiving touchdowns as well. The only downside to his fantasy value is that his production is seemingly tied to quarterback Tua Tagovailoa. When Tua was out with that terrible concussion, Achane's average fantasy finish was outside the top 40 at his position. That is a ridiculous drop compared to when Tua was on the field. But one big question Achane did answer is that he can stay healthy all 17 games, which he did in 2024, while maintaining his efficiency on a larger workload. But this dude's going to produce on the ground and through the air. He is a big play threat at all times, and the Dolphins haven't really added a ton of competition at the position. If the rest of the offense around Achane can stay healthy, I think he's an easy top 7 finisher at his position. He's worth an early second round pick in fantasy drafts, and the fact that he has a top 5 ceiling is undeniable. Moving into our running back 8, we have Kareem Williams, one of the most consistent and least talked about players in fantasy football. And like I said, that consistency is key. He's at over 1,100 rushing yards and 12 touchdowns in each of the past 2 seasons. He received a larger workload in 2024, and while his efficiency dipped a little bit, He's hit career highs in rushing yards and touchdowns. So the Rams now understand that when you put the ball in this guy's hands, good things happen. I think Kyren is a really good player, a really safe running back with a high floor that can be drafted in the mid to late second round of fantasy drafts. However, it'd be kind of dumb for me not to discuss the cons in his fantasy outlook. Over the past 2 years, the Rams have drafted 2 running backs in the middle rounds of the NFL draft. That's Blake Corum and Jarquez Hunter, each of whom do have a chance to take at least a little bit of Kyren's workload away. Now, I don't think Williams will lose his job by any means, but I'm just saying the team has good depth around him, and if either of these young backup running backs prove themselves, they could see a bit of volume come their way. Also, the Rams are set up to be a pass-heavy offense. Matthew Stafford is still a fantastic quarterback. They have Puka Nacua back healthy, and they added Devontae Adams. I think it's going to be one of the best receiver duos in the entire league. While Kareem Williams does have a super high floor, I don't think he has the highest ceiling of any player in fantasy drafts. That's why I have him at my running back 8, because I feel pretty confident that's where he can finish. Moving on to my running back 9, we have Josh Jacobs of the Green Bay Packers. He signed with Green Bay last offseason after spending several seasons with the Las Vegas Raiders and absolutely exploded as their workhorse running back. If you look at the analytics, Josh Jacobs had a league-high 22 carries inside the 5-yard line. When they got in the red zone, he was their game plan to punch it into the end zone. And he did exactly that, having 15 rushing touchdowns, which was a career high, surprisingly, in 2024. Josh Jacobs absolutely exceeded expectations in his first year in Green Bay, and the volume was there. He had over 300 carries, the second highest mark of his career, not to mention his efficiency soaring once he joined Green Bay. So I think the sky's the limit for Josh Jacobs. He's a bell cow running back that I think people are sleeping on because he's not the young, flashy pick, but he's a true workhorse, especially on the goal line, and people forget how truly good of a player he is. He's my running back 9 in fantasy football. At the 10th spot, we have Bucky Irving of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He took over the starting job late in the 2024 NFL season, but still managed to compile 1,122 rushing yards, as well as 5.42 yards per carry. On only 207 carries, he still managed to put up 8 rushing touchdowns. So I'm really excited to see what he can do with a full-time workload as the starting running back. He's going to enter the season as the top guy on the depth chart. There's no doubt about it. While he had to really earn his role last season, I expect the Buccaneers to be ready to give him the full-time starting job this year. The reason I think his ceiling is so high in fantasy was because he wasn't even playing that many snaps during his breakout in 2024, so if they give him more snaps this next season, his upside as a rusher and a receiver could increase. Speaking of which, it's easy to forget how good he was as a receiver. He was a PPR monster in 2024, and again, with that full-size workload, I expect him to be even better. And I think the upside is through the roof for Bucky Irving. I'm super excited to draft him in 2025. Heading into our last 2 spots, we have James Cook of the Buffalo Bills at my running back 11 spot. Yes, there have been some holdout talk, some things that'll scare fantasy managers away, but I do think he's going to play for the Bills this season and put a full season in. Heading into year 4, he's one of the NFL's most consistent rushers. His lowest yards per carry mark of his career was 4.73 back in 2023, and he of course improved on that mark in 2024 as well. Here's a couple issues with James Cook I have. First off, it's awesome he had 16 rushing touchdowns, but with significantly less volume than a guy like Josh Jacobs, I don't see him repeating that number in 2025. It's easy to forget that his volume regressed as well as his rushing yard production from 2023 to 2024, as well as his production as a receiver. While I do like James Cook in fantasy football, I think the rushing touchdown production was an outlier, and that he will experience touchdown regression in fantasy football. That's why I'm not willing to put him as a top 10 running back. I think he's worth a late second or early third round pick for sure, but I'm not sure if I'd be willing to draft him above that. The offense is built to pass with Josh Allen at quarterback. They also have Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman, and Dalton Kincaid as their young pass catchers. So the rushing attack isn't the focal point of this offense. Also remember, Josh Allen takes a lot of rushing touchdowns away. And while that was alright in 2024 because James Cook still got a ton of work around the goal line, that's an extremely volatile avenue of production that I could see dipping this season. However, he's still a great player that I'm not willing to put outside of my top 12 just yet. At my 12th spot, we have Chase Brown, running back for the Cincinnati Bengals, that I wasn't super high on during the season. He proved me wrong and took over the starting job. So, conceding my defeat, I'm willing to put him in my top 12. He really took the job away from Zach Moss after Moss suffered that season-ending injury. And while I expected the Bengals to bring in a running back during the NFL draft, they didn't draft a guy before the 6th round, meaning that they trust Chase Brown to be their top running back. In his first season as a starter, he had 4.32 yards per carry. That's a very solid number for a guy that's just now getting starting volume. He would have had over 1,000 yards if he didn't get injured in the final part of the season. He's an electric player with great speed, great quickness, and elusiveness. And while his ceiling is a bit capped because the Bengals are such a pass-heavy offense, he's a great player with the ball in his hands, and I trust him a heck of a lot more than I did last season, to say the least. Chase Brown's a great player, and they didn't bring in any significant competition to take away volume. Those are my top 12 running backs in 2025 fantasy football. Go ahead and give your takes in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm Joe, and this is Fantasy Trading Room.